Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I was hired to secure a dark web network. The people I'm protecting aren't alive. Okay, so I'm not sure where to start, but I guess I'll just lay it out. I'm a cybersecurity contractor, mostly freelance gigs, helping companies beef up their network security, clean up malware, all that stuff. It's nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills, and I get to work from home in my boxers most days. Plus, I've seen some weird stuff on the job, but that's just part of the territory when you're dealing with the internet's underbelly. That's how this whole mess started, actually. I got an email about a month ago, which wasn't that unusual. I get random job offers all the time, but this one caught my eye because it came from an anonymous address. I know what you're thinking. Red flag, right? Normally, yeah, I would have trashed it immediately. But the money they were offering, it was insane. They weren't asking for much either, just network security and privacy management. Nothing new to me, but for the amount of money they were throwing around, it was enough to get me curious. The thing that made me stop and think for a minute was how vague the job description was. It didn't say what kind of network I'd be securing, or who they were, just that they needed someone with strong discretion and advanced skills in data anonymization. Honestly, it sounded like some kind of dark web gig, which isn't something I mess with usually. That place is a cesspool, and I've heard all the horror stories. People disappearing, government surveillance, hackers blackmailing anyone dumb enough to dip their toes in. But, like I said, the money was insane. I won't go into specifics, but let's just say it was enough to make me forget my better judgment. So, I responded. Figured I could ask for more details and see if they were legit. The response came almost immediately. This client didn't have a name. Instead, they just used the tag Ghost Administrator. Super cliché, I know, but at the time, I brushed it off as someone being paranoid about their identity. They sent me a contract and a non-disclosure agreement. Typical stuff, but something felt off. Still, I signed. And just like that, I was in. The next day, I got instructions to download a secure messaging app. One of those encrypted ones that wipes your messages after you read them. This was starting to feel more like a spy movie than a job, but I was already committed. Here's where things started getting weird. The first task was simple enough. Set up a secure VPN and a firewall for their network. I logged into the server they sent over, expecting to see a bunch of normal data logs, maybe some shady dark web markets or black hat forums. Instead, the network was barren, like completely empty. There wasn't a single active user, no files, no web traffic. But the thing is, it wasn't offline either. There were pings, signals, the kind of stuff you'd see from a network with people on it. Only, there weren't any people, just traces. Like something had been there but left no footprints. I figured maybe it was just an empty shell, a sandbox network for testing security or something. I set everything up as requested and waited to get feedback from the Ghost Administrator. Then came the next set of instructions. Monitor the network from midnight to 3 a.m. Report any anomalies. Now, I'm not one for weird schedules, but whatever. They were paying me enough to stay up a few nights. So I did what they asked. I logged in at midnight, sat in front of my monitor with a cup of coffee, and waited. At first, nothing happened. I was just scrolling through Reddit, thinking maybe I'd watch a few videos on YouTube while I waited. And then, around 1 a.m., I saw it. Out of nowhere, a user appeared on the network. No username, no profile information, just a blank icon and an IP address that didn't make sense. Like, At all. It wasn't from any country I recognized, and it didn't even follow normal IP formatting. It was just random numbers and symbols. I watched for a few minutes, expecting this user to do something, send a message, upload a file, anything. But they just sat there, idle. And then, without warning, they vanished. Now, I'm used to seeing bots and crawlers. It's the internet. Weird activity happens all the time. But this was different. There was no log of them ever being there. Like, as soon as they disconnected, it wiped any trace of them ever existing. If I hadn't seen it myself, there'd be no evidence of them at all. I took a screenshot, just in case, and went back to waiting. A few minutes later, another user popped up. Same deal. No info, just a weird, impossible IP. I figured maybe I was dealing with some sort of deep web relay or proxy chain, something that bounces users through multiple servers to hide their tracks. But even then, it didn't explain the formatting or how they disappeared without a trace. At 3 a.m. sharp, everything went quiet again. No more users, no more weird activity. I sent my report to the ghost administrator, attaching the screenshot, and went to bed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next day, the ghost administrator replied. All they said was, "Continue monitoring." That's it. No explanation, no feedback, just keep going. At this point, I was starting to feel uneasy, but again, the money was too good to pass up. I figured maybe I was just overthinking it. That night, I logged in again. And this time, things got even stranger. The second night was when I started to realize something was seriously off. I logged in at midnight, same as before, armed with coffee and a half-baked idea that maybe this was some experimental government network or high-level corporate espionage. But I still had no real answers, only more questions. Just like the first night, nothing happened at first. I was half expecting another blank user to appear around 1 a.m., but this time it was worse. About 12:45 a.m., the lights in my office flickered. Just for a second. I glanced up, thinking maybe the bulb was going out, but everything seemed fine. At least, that's what I told myself. But I'm not an idiot. I know when something feels wrong. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, that kind of primal sense that you're not alone. I shook it off, figured it was just paranoia from staring at my screen for too long, and focused on the network logs. But then, at exactly 1 o'clock a.m., the first user appeared again. This time, I didn't look at the icon or IP. My eyes were drawn to something else. The timestamp of when they logged in. It was in the future. Like, it said they connected at 1:13 a.m., but it was only 1 o'clock a.m. on my clock. I blinked, thinking maybe my system time was out of sync. But no, everything checked out. This user, whoever they were, was connected from a time that hadn't happened yet. I stared at the screen, waiting, and sure enough, when the clock hit 1:13, the user status changed from idle to active. It was as if they knew the exact moment they were supposed to be there, like it was all scripted. And then the lights flickered again, only this time, they didn't come back on immediately. I sat in the dark, staring at my dimly lit screen. My monitor was the only source of light, casting this eerie glow over the room. I couldn't move for a second, just sitting there in the silence, waiting for the power to come back. Suddenly, the user disappeared from the network again, just like the first night. But this time, it left something behind. My screen glitched, just for a fraction of a second, like an old TV trying to tune into a lost channel. And when it came back, there was a file on my desktop. It wasn't there before. I hadn't downloaded anything, hadn't clicked any links, yet there it was, a simple text file labeled C. My gut told me to delete it immediately, but my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked it open. The document was empty, save for a single line of text. "You're not alone." That's when the floor creaked behind me. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. It wasn't just a random house noise. This was the sound of deliberate movement, like someone shifting their weight on the old wooden boards. I turned around, half expecting to see something, but the room was empty. I checked the door, locked. The windows, shut. There was no way anyone could have gotten inside. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. I spent the rest of the night on edge, unable to focus on anything other than the creeping dread that had settled in the pit of my stomach. The network stayed quiet until 3 a.m., but I knew something had changed. This wasn't just some random contract job anymore. Whatever this was, I had somehow become part of it, and I couldn't shake the feeling that backing out now would be a terrible mistake. The ghost administrator didn't respond to my report until the next afternoon. No acknowledgement of the file, the glitch, or the weird timestamp. All they sent was the same instruction as before: continue monitoring. At this point, any sane person would have called it quits. But the money, combined with the fact that I needed answers, kept me hooked. I felt like I was in too deep now, and the only way out was to figure out what the hell was going on. That night, I logged in again. By the time the third night rolled around, I was prepared, or at least, I thought I was. I made sure every door in the house was locked, windows shut, and the lights in my office were working fine. I even had my phone recording the session, just in case something bizarre happened again. But what I experienced that night, no amount of preparation could have helped. It started as usual: midnight login, a cup of coffee, waiting. But this time, the network didn't stay silent for long. A new user connected, but unlike the blank avatars from the previous nights, this one had a profile picture. It was blurry, like an old photograph scanned and compressed 1,000 times. But I could just make out a face, or at least, what should have been a face. Instead of normal features, the image was warped, stretched, pixelated, like it was caught mid-glitch. The eyes, if you could call them that, were just dark smudges, and the mouth was twisted into a jagged line that ran too far across the face, like someone had taken a picture of a scream and distorted it. It didn't look right. It didn't look human. My heart started racing as I tried to gather my thoughts. I knew I should take a screenshot, log the anomaly, but something about that image made me hesitate. It felt like if I looked at it too long, something terrible would happen, like the face was staring back at me through the screen. And then, as if in response to my fear, the user sent a message. "Are you ready to see?" I blinked at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I didn't respond. Instead, I watched in horror as my webcam light flicked on. Now, I don't use my webcam for anything. I don't even keep it plugged in most of the time. But there it was, glowing green in the dark room, staring at me. And then, in the chat box, a new message appeared. "We see you." The light flickered again, and my screen started to fill with static, the same glitching effect I'd seen with the profile picture. Only this time, it wasn't just the screen. The static sound was filling the room, growing louder, until it felt like it was crawling under my skin. Then, the screen flashed, and for a split second, I saw something. Faces, dozens of them, maybe more, all blurred and warped like the profile picture, staring at me from behind the static. They weren't still either. They were moving, mouths opening and closing like they were trying to speak, but no sound came out. Just the overwhelming hiss of static, drowning everything else out. I yanked the power cord from my monitor, my hands shaking. The screen went black, but the static continued for a few seconds longer before finally fading. My office was dead silent again. I sat there, heart pounding, trying to wrap my mind around what had just happened. This wasn't just some creepy dark web job anymore. Whatever I tapped into, it was something else entirely, something beyond the usual horror stories you hear about. I checked my phone. The recording had cut off as soon as the static started. There was nothing saved, no proof that any of it had happened. I didn't log back in that night. I couldn't. But as I sat there in the darkness, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever I was protecting on that network, it wasn't just data. And whoever, or whatever, was on the other side of that screen wasn't alive. At least, not anymore. I didn't sleep after the third night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those distorted faces behind the static, staring back at me from a place that shouldn't exist. I tried telling myself it was just a hallucination, maybe the result of too many sleepless nights, or staring at screens for too long. But deep down, I knew better. The next day, I got another message from the ghost administrator. I dreaded opening it, but I couldn't avoid it forever. The message was short, like always, and cold. Last night's disruption was expected. Proceed as instructed. Expected. What the hell did that even mean? They knew about the static, the faces. The message wasn't just eerie. It felt wrong, like a calm warning, almost taunting. I should have stopped then and there. I should have deleted everything, thrown my computer out the window, and gone dark. But instead, I convinced myself to keep going. I needed answers. That night, I logged in again, exactly at midnight. The first thing I noticed was that the network wasn't empty anymore. There were users logged in, dozens of them, but none of them had any profile information, just blank avatars, and those twisted, impossible IP addresses. And they were active. Files were being uploaded and downloaded. Chat rooms were open but silent, and yet there were no messages. Just the constant stream of data passing between them, like a hive mind sharing information without speaking. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I pushed forward, trying to stay focused. The ghost administrator hadn't given any new instructions, so I figured my job was to just monitor the activity again. But as the minutes ticked by, something else started to happen. The users began to disappear, one by one. Their avatars blinked out of existence, but not like the previous nights, where they vanished without a trace. This time, there were logs. They left behind timestamps, files, pieces of data that didn't make sense. It was like they were phasing out of the network, but leaving digital footprints behind, a scattering of broken information, half-formed packets that led nowhere. By 1 a.m., the network was completely empty again. The silence was deafening. That's when I noticed the time. It was 1:30 a.m., but I could have sworn I had just looked at the clock a minute ago and it was 12:15 a.m. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog that was suddenly settling in. I checked my phone, my watch, even a clock on the wall. All of them said the same thing, 1:30 a.m. I'd lost over an hour, and I had no memory of it. My mind was blank, like someone had just hit fast forward on my life. The screen flickered. Another user had appeared. This time, it wasn't a blank avatar. No, this one was different. The icon was a black silhouette, but not of a person, of a door. Just a plain, black door. It reminded me of those old 90s video games, where you'd click on a door and it would take you somewhere you weren't sure you wanted to go. I hovered my mouse over the profile, but before I could do anything, a message popped up. The door is open. Are you coming? My hand shook as I stared at the message. I didn't type anything, didn't even think about replying, but the screen flickered again. The user sent another message. This one somehow worse. You've already arrived. The lights in my office flickered, just like the night before. I tried to stand up, to move, but I felt frozen in place. The air around me grew heavy, thick, like the room itself was trying to hold me down. I couldn't think straight. My mind was foggy, sluggish, like I was wading through water. And then the door opened. I don't mean on my screen, I mean in my house. I heard the unmistakable creak of my front door swinging open. The problem was, I was alone, and I had locked every door before I started. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned, eyes wide, straining to see down the dark hallway just outside my office. From where I sat, I couldn't see the front door directly, but I could feel the cold air seeping in from the outside. I knew it was open. I tried to convince myself it was the wind, or maybe a faulty latch, but deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't some technical error. Whatever was happening on that network, it had spilled into my home. The user's profile blinked out of existence, but the chat remained open. And there was one last message waiting for me, something I knew I wouldn't be able to unsee. You can't close the door now. The static returned, not on my screen, but in my ears, like an invisible presence was flooding the room with that same hissing noise, wrapping itself around me. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I saw something. Shapes, shadows, moving just beyond the edges of my sight. I turned around, desperately trying to see what was creeping up behind me, but there was nothing there, just the cold, empty space. My computer shut off on its own. Everything went black. I don't remember much after that. The next thing I knew, I was sitting on the floor of my office, my back against the wall, my computer still powered off. My phone was dead, and the clock on the wall said 4:15 a.m. I had lost time again. I didn't log back in that night. Hell, I didn't even go near my computer for the next few days. I tried to shake the feeling that something had followed me out of that network, but no matter where I went in the house, I felt watched. The air felt thick, heavy, like that static was still clinging to me. I even started hearing things. Little creaks, soft footsteps, whispers in the dead of night. They weren't constant, but they were enough to remind me that the door was still open, somewhere. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew one thing. Whatever was on that network wasn't just a collection of dead data. It was alive, or something close to it. And now, it had found its way into my world. It took me days to even consider logging back in. I didn't want to go near my computer. Every time I passed my office, I felt that same heaviness in the air. The door to the room stayed closed, but I could still feel something from behind it. A presence, like someone was waiting just on the other side, hoping I'd open it. I tried to distract myself, pretend that it was all in my head, but it wasn't that easy. Strange things started happening around the house. First, it was little things, lights flickering, objects moving just out of place. You know, things that could be chalked up to an overactive imagination or stress. But then it got worse. One night, I was in bed, trying to sleep, when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the hallway just outside my bedroom door. I froze, staring up at the ceiling, listening as the footsteps came closer. They stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, waiting, praying that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. And then, the door handle turned. It didn't open, but it rattled softly, like someone was testing the lock. I wanted to call out, ask who was there, but my throat was tight. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I was paralyzed, trapped in my own fear. After a few seconds, the handle stopped turning, and everything went quiet. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I found the front door wide open again. This had happened once before, but now I couldn't deny it. Something was in my house, something from the network, something that I had let in. That's when I knew I had no choice. I had to go back. I had to face whatever it was I had gotten myself involved in, because clearly, ignoring it wasn't working. So, that night, I powered up my computer. The monitor flickered to life, but before I could even open the client to log into the network, my screen went black. For a second, I thought the computer had crashed, but then a single line of text appeared at the top of the screen. "Are you ready to see?" I felt that same chill run down my spine, the same dread I'd felt the last few nights. But this time, I didn't have a choice. I typed a single word back. Yes. The screen filled with static, just like before, but this time, it didn't stop. The noise filled the room, growing louder and louder, until it felt like it was shaking the walls. And then, suddenly, the static cut out, and the screen changed. I wasn't looking at the usual dark web client, or the blank network interface anymore. Instead, I saw a video feed. It was grainy, the kind of quality you'd get from an old security camera, but I could make out the scene clearly enough. It was my house. I saw the front door, the hallway, my office, all in real time. And then, something moved on the screen. A figure, tall and thin, walked past the front door, heading towards the hallway. My heart pounded as I realized what I was seeing. It wasn't just a recording. It was live. The figure was inside my house. The camera feed shifted, showing the hallway. The figure came into view again, moving slowly, deliberately, until it stopped in front of my office door. My office door, the one I had locked. The figure reached out, grasping the handle, and slowly turned it. I heard the click of the lock disengaging. In real life. I spun around in my chair, staring at the door, heart hammering in my chest. The door didn't open, but I heard something on the other side. Breathing. Soft, shallow breaths, as if someone, or something, was waiting. I turned back to the screen, panicked. The figure was still there, still standing in front of the office door. Then, without warning, it leaned forward, pressing its face right up against the camera. It was the same face I had seen before, the warped, distorted face from the network. Only now, it was clearer. I could see the smudged, hollow eyes and that grotesque, stretched smile, as if someone had tried to reconstruct a human face but got all the details wrong. It stared directly into the camera, into me, as if it knew I was watching. The breathing on the other side of the door grew louder, closer, and then the figure spoke, its voice low, distorted, like it was being transmitted through layers of interference. "You shouldn't have opened the door." The words weren't just on the screen. I heard them in the room with me, whispering from behind the door. I stood up, backing away from the computer, my whole body shaking. The door rattled, and I knew, without a doubt, that whatever was behind it wasn't human. I ran out of the office, down the hallway, and out of the house. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the street, gasping for breath, my heart racing. When I finally turned back to look at the house, the lights in the office were flickering. I could see the shadow of someone, or something, moving inside. I didn't go back inside that night, or the next night. In fact, I haven't gone back since. I've been staying with a friend, trying to figure out what to do. I tried contacting the ghost administrator, but the messages won't send anymore. The client just stopped working. The last thing I saw before I powered off the computer for good was a single message on the network. "We're still watching." I don't know what they are. I don't know where they came from. But I know one thing for sure. I let them in. And now, they're here. If you ever get an anonymous job offer from someone who refuses to tell you what you're really working on, don't take it. I learned the hard way that some doors aren't meant to be opened, and once you do, there's no going back. I discovered a dark web AI that writes people's futures. Mine ends in a way I can't escape. Alright, so before I dive into this, I just want to clarify something. I'm not the kind of person who typically does dumb stuff on the internet, like you see those people on YouTube or Reddit who talk about messing around with the dark web, and I always thought, why would anyone willingly do that? That's how I used to think, until I got curious. I've always had a fascination with the strange corners of the internet, though. You know how the internet can be, right? You're watching one thing on YouTube, and the next minute you're deep into some conspiracy theory about lizard people. Well, that's how it started. I was watching these videos about urban legends, weird internet lore, creepy stuff like Cicada 3301 or the original creepypastas. That's when I came across something I'd never heard of before. A mysterious AI program that allegedly tells people's futures. Of course, most of the time when you hear things like that, it's some scam or hoax. But the more I researched, the more convinced I became that there might be something legit behind it. I found mentions of this AI in obscure forums, buried beneath layers of vague references, warnings, and horror stories. The AI had no official name, but people were calling it the Oracle. Now, I wasn't dumb enough to just dive headfirst into the dark web without knowing what I was doing. I read tons of guides, watched tutorials on how to protect myself, and set up a VPN and Tor browser. I thought I was being smart, cautious even. But looking back, I realize now how naive that was. I told myself it was just curiosity. That's how it always starts, right? You tell yourself you're just going to look, nothing else. But the more I read about the Oracle, the more intrigued I became. Supposedly, it wasn't just a fortune teller. It was an AI that knew things about you. People who used it said it could tell your future in excruciating detail. Like, not just general stuff like, you'll be rich, or you'll die young, but specific events, times, places, people. And it always ended with a chilling phrase, your future is already written. Most people who shared their stories seemed to regret ever using it. They talked about how their lives spiraled out of control after interacting with the Oracle, but I assumed it was all exaggeration. I mean, these were random posts by anonymous users on sketchy forums. How seriously was I really supposed to take them? Still, I couldn't shake the idea. What if there was something to it? What if it was real? Maybe it was some advanced algorithm just spitting out scarily accurate predictions based on data mining or whatever, but I had to see for myself. That night, I waited until around 2 a.m. Yeah, classic stupid move, I know. Before I booted up my laptop and connected to Tor. I'd done my homework, felt like I had a decent handle on how to navigate the dark web. I searched for hours, clicking through dead links and fake sites, before I finally found it. A tiny, obscure page hidden beneath layers of nonsense. It was just a black screen with a single prompt in the middle. Enter your name. No intro, no instructions, just that. It felt too simple, but at this point, I was committed. So I typed in my name. Nothing happened at first, and I almost thought I'd been scammed again. Then the screen flickered, and another prompt appeared. What do you seek? I hesitated. What was I supposed to type? Did it want something cryptic like truth or enlightenment? I decided to keep it basic. My future. The moment I hit enter, the screen went black again. I stared at it for a few seconds, waiting. Then text began to slowly type itself across the screen, like someone was manually inputting it one keystroke at a time. Your future is already written. Yeah, no surprise there, right? I felt a weird chill, but I chalked it up to the creepy atmosphere and the fact that it was 2 a.m. and I was alone in the dark. I was about to close the browser when the text changed again. Your death will be of your own making. I froze. Okay, that was creepy, but still vague enough to be the same fortune cookie nonsense I was expecting. But then, more text appeared, and this time it was way more specific. You will die at 11:37 p.m. on November 12th, 2024. I blinked at the screen, feeling my heart race a little. The date wasn't random. That was less than 2 months away. I stared at the time, 11:37 p.m., burning it into my brain. Something about how specific it was really freaked me out. I mean, who the hell programs an AI to spit out death predictions like that? I slammed my laptop shut, telling myself it was just some creepy trick. Maybe it was meant to scare people, just a twisted prank to mess with your head. But even as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake it. The time, the date, it was too real, too precise, and the fact that it mentioned my death being of my own making, that didn't sit well with me at all. The worst part, it was already past midnight by the time I shut the laptop, meaning it was November 12th. That date was exactly 2 months from the moment I saw it. That's when things started to get weird. For the next few days, I tried to forget about it. I didn't tell anyone, not my friends, not my family. I figured if I did, they'd either laugh at me or think I was losing it. But no matter how much I distracted myself, that date kept creeping into my thoughts, like some sort of countdown I couldn't shake. November 12th. I kept telling myself it was just a stupid prank. I mean, how could a random AI know anything about my future? But there was this nagging voice in the back of my head whispering, what if? It didn't help that weird things started happening almost immediately. At first, it was subtle, things that could easily be chalked up to coincidence or me just being paranoid. My phone would glitch out for no reason, freezing or restarting itself out of nowhere. Apps would open and close without me touching anything. There was one night where I woke up to my TV being on, even though I was sure I'd turned it off before going to bed. Little things like that. Then, there was the incident with my laptop. One night, I was scrolling through Reddit, minding my own business, when my screen flickered, just like it had when I first found the Oracle. For a second, I thought maybe I was just imagining things. But then it happened again. This time, the screen went completely black, just like it had on the dark web. And then, that same message appeared. Your future is already written. My heart dropped. I hadn't even opened Tor. I wasn't on the dark web, hadn't visited that creepy site since the first night. But here it was, as if the program had somehow followed me back into my regular life. The message stayed there for a few seconds before it disappeared, replaced by another. You can't change what's coming. I slammed the laptop shut, but I was shaking. My brain was racing with a million thoughts. Was my laptop hacked? Was this all some elaborate, messed up joke? Or was it something worse? I don't know how long I sat there, just staring at the closed laptop. But eventually, I convinced myself it was just a glitch. Maybe there was some malware left from the dark website. Maybe this was all a freak coincidence. I was too scared to even open the laptop again that night. The next day, I tried to act normal. I went to work, hung out with some friends after, tried to distract myself with everyday stuff, but I felt off the entire time. like something was lurking just behind me, waiting. It was like being in a horror movie where you're constantly expecting the jump scare, but it never comes. That night, I checked my laptop, hoping it would just be back to normal. I ran antivirus scans, deleted some files, even considered wiping the whole thing and reinstalling everything. But when I turned it on, it seemed fine. No weird messages, no glitches, at least not at first. I was about to put the whole thing behind me when my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but when I opened it, the message chilled me to my core. 11:37 p.m. Remember. I dropped my phone like it had burned me, my heart pounding in my chest. This had to be someone messing with me, right? But how? Who could have known about the exact time from the Oracle? No one knew. I hadn't told a soul. I tried to call the number back, but it went straight to voicemail, some robotic voice that sounded garbled, like it was speaking through a broken radio. The whole thing made my skin crawl. Now, I was fully freaked out. I deleted the message, turned off my phone, and just sat there, staring at the wall. The fact that it was happening outside of my computer, that it had somehow reached my phone, made it feel like there was nowhere I could go to escape it. This wasn't just some creepy website anymore. It was in my life, seeping into everything around me. The worst part, the clock was ticking closer to November 12th, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something really bad was going to happen. As the days went by, the weirdness escalated. The messages didn't stop. They started coming in at random times. On my phone, on my laptop, sometimes even as notifications popping up on my smart TV. All of them said the same thing, over and over. 11:37 p.m. You can't escape it. It didn't matter if I deleted the messages or tried to block the number. New ones would always appear, almost like the system itself was haunted. I even considered going to the police, but how could I explain any of this? Hey officer, I went on the dark web and now a mysterious AI is sending me death threats. Yeah, right. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I tried to ignore it. That worked for a while, at least until something happened that I couldn't ignore anymore. I had stayed up late one night, too wired to sleep. I was sitting on my couch, mindlessly scrolling through social media, trying to avoid checking the clock, because I knew it was close to midnight. But the room felt off, like the air had changed. You know that feeling when you're alone, but you're convinced someone else is in the room with you? That's what I felt. I glanced up from my phone and, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something shift in the reflection of the dark TV screen. I swear to God, I saw a shadow move across the room, like someone was standing there, just out of view. My stomach dropped. I turned the TV on immediately, flooding the room with light, but there was nothing. No one was there. I tried to laugh it off, tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then I saw it. Right there, on the TV screen, was another message. 11:37 p.m. Soon. I nearly screamed. The TV wasn't even connected to the internet. It was just a regular TV, no smart features, no apps. I hadn't even touched the remote. At this point, I didn't know what was real anymore. My phone buzzed again, another message from the same number. You're not alone. My blood ran cold, and I couldn't stop myself from glancing at the dark corners of the room. My apartment suddenly felt too quiet, like the silence was alive, listening. I grabbed my phone, ready to call someone, anyone, but before I could do anything, the power went out. Complete darkness. I was left standing in the pitch-black room, my heart pounding, every nerve in my body on edge. And in the silence, I thought I heard something. A faint sound, like footsteps, moving slowly behind me. I stood there, frozen, trying to convince myself that the sound wasn't real. It couldn't be. It had to be something outside. some random noise from the apartment above mine or the street below. But as the darkness pressed in around me, that faint sound, those slow, deliberate footsteps, grew louder. My heart was racing, pounding so hard in my chest that I could barely hear over it. I strained to listen, holding my breath, but the sound had stopped. The silence was so thick, it felt like I could reach out and touch it. And then, just when I started to think maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, I felt it. A presence. You know how sometimes you can feel someone staring at you, even if you can't see them? That's what it was like. I felt eyes on me, watching, waiting. My skin crawled, every hair on the back of my neck standing up. I didn't dare turn around. I was too scared of what I might see. In that moment, I was convinced that if I moved, if I so much as breathed too loud, whatever was in the room with me would make its move. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed, but eventually I forced myself to move. I grabbed my phone, fumbling with it in the dark, and switched on the flashlight. The narrow beam cut through the pitch black, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. I swept the light around the room, my hand shaking, but the room was empty. No shadows moving, no figures lurking. Nothing. I let out a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. It was just my imagination. It had to be. The footsteps. Maybe an old pipe or something in the walls. My apartment was in a building that was over 100 years old. It wasn't unusual for the place to make weird noises. But that feeling, that presence, that wasn't so easy to explain away. I quickly went around my apartment, checking every corner, every closet, even under the bed. Nothing. Still, the power was out, and I wasn't about to stick around in a dead, silent apartment after all that. I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my keys, and bolted out the door, not even bothering to lock it behind me. I needed to get out of there. I needed noise, people, something that wasn't my own creepy, dark apartment. I headed to the only place that was still open, a 24-hour diner a few blocks away. It wasn't exactly packed, but there were enough people inside for me to feel somewhat safer. I slid into a booth in the corner, ordered a coffee, and sat there, staring at the bright lights, like they could somehow chase away whatever had followed me. I kept checking my phone. The time felt like it was crawling, every second ticking by with an eerie weight. It was around 11:10 p.m. when I got the next message. Running won't change anything. I almost dropped my phone. My mouth went dry, and my stomach twisted into knots. It was like whoever, or whatever, was doing this knew exactly what I was doing, knew where I was. I glanced around the diner, half expecting to see someone sitting in the corner, watching me. But no one looked suspicious. Everyone was just minding their own business. My phone buzzed again. 11:37 p.m. You can't escape. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. It was happening again. The countdown. It was always about that time. I still had no idea what was supposed to happen at 11:37, but the way the messages kept hammering that time into my head, it felt like something was closing in. I considered calling someone, my parents, my best friend. But what would I say? That I was being stalked by an AI? That I was being haunted by some weird entity? I'd sound like a lunatic. So instead, I just sat there, sipping my coffee and watching the clock, feeling the weight of every second that passed. At 11:30, the diner's lights flickered. Just a quick blink, but enough to send my heart into overdrive. The waitress, a tired-looking woman with dark circles under her eyes, glanced up at the lights, but didn't seem too bothered. Probably just a power surge, right? But I knew better. Or at least, I felt like I did. Something was about to happen. The minutes crawled by, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from the clock. My phone sat on the table in front of me, screen dark, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. I didn't want to see another message. I didn't want to know what was coming next. 11:35 p.m. 2 more minutes. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that it was all in my head. There was no way any of this was real. The power flicker? Just a coincidence. The footsteps in my apartment? Probably just creaky old floors. The messages? Hell, maybe someone was messing with me, some kind of sick prank. That's all it was. But deep down, I didn't believe that. 11:36 p.m. I gripped the edge of the table, my heart pounding in my chest. My breath came in shallow bursts, and I felt like I was about to have a full-blown panic attack right there in the middle of the diner. And then, the lights went out. Total darkness. The entire diner fell silent for a split second before people started muttering, confused. Some pulled out their phones to use as flashlights, but all I could do was sit there, frozen, my eyes fixed on the time on my phone. I watched as the seconds ticked down. 11:36:50, 11:36:55, 11:37. My phone buzzed. The screen lit up, and with shaking hands, I lifted it to read the message. But it wasn't what I expected. There was no cryptic warning this time, no threat. It was a photo of me, sitting in the booth, in the exact spot where I was right now, staring down at my phone. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I frantically scanned the diner, my eyes darting from face to face, but no one was looking at me. No one was holding up a phone or a camera. Everyone was just as confused as I was by the power outage. But something, had taken that photo. Right there, in that moment, at 11:37 p.m. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. I grabbed my phone, stuffed it into my pocket, and practically ran out of the diner, my legs barely able to carry me. I didn't care where I went. I just needed to get away. But the moment I stepped outside, I realized it didn't matter where I went. The streetlights were out. The buildings around me were dark. The entire block was plunged into shadow, like the whole world had just shut off. And then, I heard it again. The footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. They were coming from behind me, growing closer with each step. I couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body felt glued to the spot. The footsteps were getting louder, like whoever, or whatever, wasn't in a hurry, but knew they didn't need to be. They were coming for me, and there was no place to hide. I forced my legs to move, stumbling forward down the darkened street. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced that any second I'd see a figure emerge from the shadows. But the street behind me was empty. No cars, no people, just darkness stretching on forever. My phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look, but it was like a compulsion. I pulled it out, my fingers shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. Another message. Running only delays the inevitable. I slammed my phone back into my pocket, trying to block out the words, but they echoed in my head like a broken record. No matter where I went, no matter what I did, this thing, it was toying with me. It had already written my future, and I was just playing along, moving through the motions like a puppet on strings. I turned down another street, trying to orient myself. My apartment wasn't far, but the thought of going back there filled me with dread. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a trap. I needed somewhere else, somewhere with people, light, anything that would keep me from feeling so alone. I spotted a gas station up ahead, its neon sign flickering weakly against the darkness. It was the only building that still had some semblance of life, the faint hum of the sign almost comforting in the silence. I rushed toward it, pushing the door open with more force than necessary. Inside, the harsh fluorescent lights cast everything in an eerie, sterile glow. A bored-looking cashier glanced up from behind the counter, barely acknowledging me before going back to their phone. The store was empty aside from a few aisles of junk food and a coffee machine that gurgled softly in the corner. I headed straight for the back of the store, as far from the entrance as possible. My breath was still coming in short gasps, my heart racing. The footsteps had stopped when I entered, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting. I leaned against a shelf, trying to pull myself together. The lights buzzed overhead, flickering slightly, casting shadows that seemed to stretch too long across the floor. I glanced at the clock on the wall, 11:45 p.m. I was past the dreaded 11:37, but that didn't bring me any relief. Whatever this was, it wasn't bound to a specific time. It was still out there, closing in, waiting for the right moment to strike. I pulled out my phone again, half expecting another message, but the screen stayed dark. No notifications, no cryptic warnings. I scrolled through my contacts, debating whether I should call someone. Maybe my best friend, maybe my sister. But what could they do? I couldn't drag anyone else into this nightmare. Suddenly, the door to the gas station swung open with a loud creak. I froze. Footsteps echoed through the small space, slow and steady, the same deliberate pace I'd heard before. I could feel the air shift again, that oppressive heaviness returning. I knew without even looking that whoever had walked in wasn't here to buy chips or fill up their gas tank. I peeked around the corner, barely daring to breathe. A man stood just inside the door, his back to me. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over his face. Something about the way he stood there, motionless, made my skin crawl. He didn't move, didn't browse the aisles or head toward the cashier. He just stood there, as if he were waiting for something, or someone. My phone buzzed. The sound felt deafening in the tense silence. I fumbled for it, my heart hammering in my chest. When I glanced at the screen, my blood turned to ice. He's here. The man's head twitched, like he'd heard the buzz, like he knew it was me. Slowly, painfully slowly, he turned around. His face was hidden beneath the shadow of the hood, but I could feel his eyes on me, burning through the air like they were made of fire. He didn't say anything, didn't move. I backed away, trying to keep my movements quiet, but my hands were shaking so badly that I knocked a pack of chips off the shelf. The crinkling sound felt deafening in the silence. That's when he started walking toward me. Not fast, not running, just that same slow, deliberate pace, as if he had all the time in the world and knew there was no point in rushing. The fluorescent lights above flickered again, and for a split second, his face was visible beneath the hood. It wasn't normal. It wasn't human. His skin was pale, almost gray, like something long dead. His eyes, I don't even know how to describe them. They were too dark, too empty, like staring into a void that just sucked all the light from the room. I couldn't tear my gaze away, no matter how much I wanted to. And his mouth, God, his mouth, was twisted into this horrible grin, like he was enjoying this. I stumbled backward, barely able to keep my feet under me. My back hit the wall, trapping me between the shelf and the cold tile floor. The man, thing, whatever it was, kept coming closer. I was cornered. No way out. My phone buzzed again, and I forced myself to look down. You can't escape. Panic surged through me. I scrambled to my feet, my hands slipping on the floor as I pushed myself upright. I bolted toward the cashier, who still hadn't noticed anything. I shouted at him, my voice high and desperate, but he didn't react. He was staring at his phone like I wasn't even there. I turned around. The man was gone, just vanished. I blinked, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. Had I imagined it? Was this all just some kind of waking nightmare? But no, My phone was still buzzing, those messages still appearing like some twisted countdown. The door to the gas station swung open again, the bell chiming softly as someone else walked in. This time, it was a regular-looking guy, probably in his 20s, with a backpack slung over his shoulder. He glanced at me and gave a friendly nod before heading toward the drink section. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. The man had been there. I'd seen him. I'd felt him. But now he was just gone. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to breathe, trying to focus. I needed help. I needed someone to listen to me, to see what I was seeing. I couldn't be alone in this anymore. But when I glanced at the cashier again, my blood ran cold. He was gone too. The store was empty, completely empty. And then, the lights went out. The darkness in the gas station felt suffocating, like it was pressing in from all sides. I could still feel the cold tile beneath my feet, hear the faint hum of the refrigerators in the back, but I couldn't see anything. It was like being dropped into a void, empty, endless, and terrifyingly silent. My phone buzzed again, lighting up the space just enough to cast a pale glow. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. The message glared up at me, like a final nail in the coffin. It's time. A cold wave of terror washed over me. Time for what? Was it going to kill me? Was this how it ended, here, in a random gas station, alone in the dark? I tried to steady my breathing, but every inhale felt like it was filled with razor blades. I heard something then, soft at first, like a whisper. It was coming from behind me, growing louder. The footsteps. That slow, deliberate pace that I'd come to dread. They were back, echoing through the dark space, bouncing off the walls in a way that made it impossible to tell where they were coming from. Closer, closer. I spun around, shining my phone's flashlight into the blackness, desperately searching for anything that could help me, or at least let me see what was coming. The light bounced off shelves and snack displays, but there was no sign of the man. The gas station seemed empty again, like I was alone in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But the footsteps didn't stop. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as the sound got closer. It was as if they were circling me, moving just outside the edge of the light, waiting for the moment to strike. I backed up, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. My fingers fumbled against the wall behind me, desperately searching for something solid, something that could ground me, but all I felt was cold tile. I was trapped. Then I heard it, a soft click, like a door unlocking. The emergency exit. Without thinking, I bolted toward the sound. I couldn't see the door, but I knew the general direction. The footsteps were still following me, right behind me, as if they were chasing me through the dark. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might explode, but I pushed forward, sprinting blindly. My hand finally slammed into the cold metal of the exit door. I fumbled with the handle, yanking it open with a loud screech. The cold night air hit me like a slap, and I stumbled out into the alleyway behind the gas station. For a second, I thought I'd made it. I thought maybe, just maybe, I had escaped. But when I looked up, the alley wasn't empty. He was standing there, waiting for me. The man from the gas station. The same hood, the same hollow, dark eyes that seemed to swallow all the light around them. That twisted, inhuman grin spread across his face as he stepped toward me, slow and deliberate, like this was just a game to him. I backed away, my body trembling, my mind screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It was like they were stuck to the ground, like the darkness itself had reached up and grabbed me. My phone buzzed again. I knew I shouldn't look, but I couldn't help it. I glanced down at the screen, the light casting eerie shadows across my shaking hands. You were never supposed to run. That message hit me like a punch to the gut. My stomach twisted, and I realized then what this was all about. It wasn't just some random dark web AI playing with my life. It was more than that. It had never been about escaping. It had been leading me here, to this moment, all along. The footsteps behind me stopped, and I turned, half expecting to see nothing again. But this time, I wasn't alone. There were more of them, figures, dozens of them, standing in the shadows of the alley. Their faces hidden, their forms barely visible, but I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. I was surrounded. The man in the hood stepped forward, his grin widening as he closed the distance between us. He reached out, his hand pale and bony, fingers curling like claws. I backed up until my back hit the brick wall. There was nowhere left to go. My phone buzzed one final time, and I glanced down, my eyes blurring with fear. Your future was written the moment you asked for it. The realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just about me asking for my future. The oracle, whatever it was, had set this in motion the second I entered my name. It didn't just predict my future, it controlled it. It was always leading me here, to this exact moment. I looked up, my body frozen with terror, as the hooded figure loomed over me. His hand was almost touching my chest now, the cold radiating from him like death itself. There was no escape. There never had been. The last thing I saw was his twisted grin widening as everything went black, and the last thing I heard was the whispering sound of footsteps fading into the night. I found a marketplace on the dark web that sells alternate lives. The life I bought is starting to replace my own. I guess like most bad decisions, this all started with boredom. You know how it goes. You're sitting there on a Wednesday night with nothing to do, your friends aren't around, you've scrolled through every social media feed until your brain feels numb, and then suddenly you get the itch to do something different. So I ended up doing what I always told myself I'd never do. I dove into the dark web. Now, before you start judging me, let me say I had no plan to buy anything illegal or get into some shady business. I was just curious. You hear all these stories, right? Like, oh, there's hitmen for hire, or you can buy organs, drugs, whatever you want. It's almost like the dark web becomes this urban legend, and after a while, you want to see if it's real. I'd been messing around with Tor for a couple of weeks before this happened. At first, I just found forums, mostly people posting about conspiracy theories, weird ramblings, and once or twice, I stumbled on what I think was some kind of black market, but I didn't stick around long enough to know for sure. The thing is, the deeper you go, the stranger things get. I don't even remember what I searched for that night, but somehow I found it. The site that changed everything. The layout was basic, like something out of the early 2000s, a white screen with black text, a couple of crude images. It was called The Marketplace of New Beginnings, which sounded like some generic motivational seminar, not like what I actually stumbled onto. There were different tabs, new identities, escape plans, clean slates. It was like one of those scammy websites where you can supposedly buy a new passport. But this one was a little different. One of the tabs caught my eye. Alternate lives. I clicked it without really thinking. That's where it all started. The page loaded with a list of offerings that immediately got my heart racing. I'm talking actual lives for sale, not like witness protection stuff. No, these were complete lives you could buy, like choosing a character in a video game. They had descriptions and prices, like profiles. Young woman, 24, carefree lifestyle, living in a beach town, or man, 32, successful entrepreneur, no debt, multiple properties. It was insane, right? Like, Who believes this stuff? I should have clicked off, but I didn't. Instead, I scrolled down the page, and that's when I found her. The profile didn't have much detail, just a simple description. Male, 28, average life, no major regrets, content. The thing that really got me, though, was the price. It was ridiculously cheap. Like, I've spent more on a night out with friends than what they were charging for this dude's life. My curiosity got the better of me, and before I could stop myself, I clicked buy. I'm not even sure why I did it. Maybe it was the price. Maybe it was the mystery. Or maybe it was just boredom messing with my head. I don't know. I filled out some basic info, email address, crypto wallet, and just like that, it was done. No confirmation screen, no extra security, just a simple, "Your purchase has been processed. Please wait 48 hours for your new life to begin." I felt ridiculous. Like, was I really expecting someone to show up at my door with a package containing this dude's life? I closed my laptop and figured that was the end of it. Maybe I just lost a few bucks to a scam. Whatever. I went to bed that night, half laughing at myself. But that's when things started getting weird. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing non-stop. I had a bunch of notifications, like, way more than usual. At first, I thought it was just spam or something, but then I started looking closer. They were all messages from people I didn't recognize, conversations I apparently had but didn't remember having. One of them said, "Hey man, where you been? We missed you at the bar last night." Another one was like, "Yo, I need that report on my desk by noon today." And the creepiest one of all just read, "So happy to see you again." I sat up in bed, confused and a little freaked out. I had no idea who any of these people were. The names didn't ring a bell. The places they mentioned didn't make sense. I chalked it up to some kind of glitch, maybe a wrong number thing, but that didn't explain the sheer volume of them. Then I checked my email. There was one new message, with no subject, from an address I didn't recognize. All it said was, "Your new life begins now." Okay, now I was really starting to freak out. The thing is, though, I couldn't stop looking into it. It's like, once you open a door you weren't supposed to, your brain won't let you walk away. You need to know what's on the other side. That's when I noticed the photos. Photos of me. But they weren't pictures I remembered taking. There I was, standing with people I'd never met before, in places I'd never been, wearing clothes I didn't own. My heart started pounding. Was this some kind of prank? Deepfake stuff? Was someone messing with me? I couldn't figure it out. But then I got a message from my mom. "Hey honey, just checking in. Did you forget to call me for my birthday yesterday? No worries, love you." Here's the thing. My mom's birthday wasn't for another 2 months. I didn't call my mom back right away. I just stared at the message for a solid 5 minutes, trying to figure out what was going on. Like, was I losing my mind? I'm not the kind of person who forgets birthdays, especially not my mom's. So, how could she think I'd missed it? I went back and checked my calendar. Her birthday was still 2 months away, just like I remembered. It didn't make sense, but then, none of this did. I decided to clear my head, so I went outside for a walk. I figured maybe I was just overthinking things, getting too worked up over some weird internet prank. Fresh air, you know? That's supposed to help. But as soon as I stepped outside, I realized something was off. It wasn't anything major at first, just little things. My neighbor, Mrs. Porter, waved at me like she always did, but then she said, "Good to see you again, Derek." Now, here's the thing. My name's not Derek, it's Nick. I froze for a second, wondering if I'd misheard her. But no, she definitely said Derek. I waved back awkwardly and kept walking. my heart pounding in my chest. The streets looked the same, the houses, the trees, everything was just like it had always been. But I felt like I was walking through some kind of funhouse version of reality. Everything looked normal, but it didn't feel normal. I got to the corner store, figuring I'd grab something to drink and maybe calm my nerves a bit. I stepped inside, and the guy behind the counter smiled at me like we were old friends. "Back already?" he said. "Did you forget something earlier?" I blinked, confused. I hadn't been there all day. No, I haven't been in today," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He frowned, tilting his head like he was trying to figure out if I was messing with him. "You were here this morning, man. Bought a coffee and a lottery ticket. You feeling okay?" I forced a laugh, pretending like it was some kind of mix-up. "Must have been someone else," I said, even though I knew that was impossible. This guy knew me by name. I've been coming to this store for years. He just shrugged and rang me up. But as I left the store, the unease I felt earlier had turned into full-blown panic. What the hell was happening? Did I sleepwalk here? Was someone impersonating me? As soon as I got home, I rushed to my laptop, determined to figure out if this was connected to the site I'd found. Maybe I could contact someone, get my money back, or at least figure out if there was some glitch or scam going on. But the site was gone. I'm not talking like it was down or giving me an error message. I mean, gone. No trace of it in my browser history. I tried everything. Tor browser, different VPNs, even searching for it on forums where people talk about this kind of stuff. Nothing. It was like the site had never existed. The uneasiness I felt earlier shifted into full-blown paranoia. My thoughts were racing. Was someone watching me? Was I part of some weird experiment? None of this made sense, and no amount of Googling was helping. The weirdest part was, I didn't know who I could talk to. I couldn't exactly explain to my friends, "Hey, I think I bought someone else's life on the dark web, and now things are glitching out." They'd think I'd lost it. But then, things got worse. That night, I had a dream. Well, I thought it was a dream. I was sitting in a small, unfamiliar apartment, definitely not mine. The place was messy but lived in. There were clothes tossed over a chair, dishes piled up in the sink, and a small desk in the corner with papers scattered all over it. I was sitting on the couch, holding a TV remote, flipping through channels I didn't recognize. None of the shows made sense. They were all distorted, like old VHS tapes that had been played too many times, with static and warped audio. And the weirdest part, I didn't feel like myself. Like, I wasn't Nick in that moment. I was someone else. When I woke up, my heart was pounding, and I was drenched in sweat. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when I got up and looked around my room, and I saw something that made my stomach drop. Sitting on the nightstand next to my bed was the exact same TV remote from my dream. I hadn't seen it before. I sure as hell didn't own it. But there it was, sitting right there, as if it had always been there. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. I just stood there, staring at it, my mind racing through 1,000 explanations, none of them making sense. How could something from my dream appear in real life? Had I sleepwalked again? Did someone break into my house and leave it there? It didn't make any sense. That's when I noticed the time on my phone. It was 2:43 a.m., and I had 3 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. My heart felt like it was about to explode out of my chest. I didn't want to listen to the voicemails, but I knew I had to. My hand was shaking as I pressed play. The first one was just static, but the second one, it was someone whispering. I couldn't make out all the words, but I heard one thing clearly. "We're waiting for you." The third message was even worse. It wasn't a voice. It was just breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing, like someone was standing right next to me, listening. I dropped my phone on the bed and backed away, feeling like I was about to be sick. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The next day, things escalated. When I went to take a shower, I noticed something in the mirror that made my blood run cold. There was a mark on my arm, just below my wrist, almost like a small scar. But the thing is, I didn't have any scars on my arm. At least I didn't remember getting one. I stared at it, running my fingers over the raised skin, trying to remember if I'd hurt myself recently. Nothing came to mind. Then, in a flash, I remembered something from the dream the night before. The person I'd been, the version of me, had a scar in the exact same spot. I was losing track of reality, and then it hit me. The life I'd bought wasn't just some weird fantasy or digital scam. It was real, and somehow, it was merging with mine. And the scariest part, I couldn't tell where I ended and where he began. I didn't leave the house for a couple of days after that. I couldn't. The scar on my arm was like a warning, a constant reminder that something wasn't right. Every time I glanced at it, I felt like I was staring at someone else's skin, like I was wearing a body that didn't belong to me. I tried to act normal though, tried to go through my routine, work, eat, sleep. But it didn't matter how hard I tried to ignore it. Something was creeping into my life, and no matter how much I pretended everything was fine, I could feel it slipping away. The thing that really freaked me out was the emails. They started flooding in about 2 days after I noticed the scar. At first, they were just random spam, stuff I'd usually ignore. But then they got personal, really personal. One subject line just read, "How's the new life treating you, Derek?" I froze when I saw that name again. I thought maybe it was some leftover joke from that day Mrs. Porter called me Derek. But the email, it wasn't a joke. I opened it, my hands trembling. Inside, there was no message, no greeting, just a single attachment, a photo. It was me, or at least, I thought it was me. The picture showed me standing in front of a house I didn't recognize, wearing clothes I didn't own, with my arm around a woman I'd never seen before. She was smiling, looking at me like we'd been together for years, and the weirdest part, I was smiling too. I looked happy, but I had no idea who she was or when that photo was taken. It couldn't have been real, right? I mean, the day before, I'd spent the entire day in my apartment, alone. There was no way I could have gone anywhere, let alone met this random woman and posed for a picture. But there it was, proof that I had been somewhere, doing something that I had no memory of. My chest felt tight, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. I immediately started digging through my photo albums on my phone, looking for something, anything that could explain what was happening. But nothing seemed out of place. All my usual photos were there, my apartment, my friends, random shots of my cat. But no sign of that woman, no sign of that house. It was as if that email photo was the only proof that this other life existed. I thought about deleting it, pretending I'd never seen it, but something inside me wouldn't let me. I saved the photo to my phone and shut my laptop, trying to push the whole thing out of my head. That night, I had another dream. This time, it wasn't like the last one, where I was just a passive observer in someone else's life. No, this one was worse. I was him. I found myself standing in front of the house from the photo, the same house I'd never seen before. The air smelled different, cleaner, fresher, like I wasn't even in my city anymore. The woman from the photo was there, standing next to me, holding my hand. She looked up at me, smiling like we shared some kind of secret. "Let's go inside," she said softly. I followed her, even though every instinct in me was screaming to run. The house felt warm, familiar. I could feel the scar on my wrist itching as we walked through the front door. Inside, everything was cozy. Couches, a fireplace, family photos on the wall, photos of us, photos of me, this woman, and a kid. I felt sick. I stumbled into the living room, where a TV was playing some old sitcom. On the coffee table in front of the TV was the same remote I'd found on my nightstand after the last dream. My head was spinning. How could all of this be happening? It was just a dream, right? But the warmth of the woman's hand in mine, the faint scent of her perfume, it all felt too real. Suddenly, she let go of my hand and walked over to the couch. She patted the seat next to her, like she was inviting me to sit down. My legs felt heavy, but I moved toward her, almost like I didn't have a choice. I sat down, and she leaned her head on my shoulder. "This is nice," she whispered. "Just like before." Before what? I couldn't ask. My mouth wouldn't move. I just sat there, my heart pounding in my chest, my body refusing to respond. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, coming from down the hallway. I turned my head, and my blood ran cold. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the darkness. But I didn't need to see his face. I knew exactly who it was. It was me. The man walked toward us, his footsteps echoing in the silent room. He stopped in front of the couch, towering over us. The woman didn't react. She just sat there, smiling, as if nothing was wrong. I tried to move, to stand up, but I was paralyzed. The man, the version of me, just stared down at me, his eyes cold and lifeless. He didn't say a word, but I could feel his presence pressing down on me, suffocating me. Then, in a low voice that didn't sound quite human, he said, "It's time to go." I jolted awake, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. My heart was racing, and I could still feel the weight of that other version of me standing over the bed, even though I was alone. I glanced at the clock. 3:33 a.m. That's when I heard the knock at the door. It was soft, almost hesitant, but in the dead silence of the night, it might as well have been a gunshot. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Who the hell would be knocking on my door at this hour? I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me after that nightmare. But then the knock came again, louder this time. I threw off the covers and crept toward the door, my entire body shaking. I didn't dare look through the peephole. I couldn't. Something inside me knew what I would see if I did. Instead, I pressed my ear to the door, listening. I could hear faint breathing on the other side, slow and steady, like someone was standing right there, waiting for me to open it. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. But after a few moments, the breathing stopped, and everything went silent. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Finally, when I was sure whoever, or whatever, was at the door had left, I cautiously stepped back. That's when I noticed the envelope. It had been slid under the door at some point while I was frozen in place. I bent down, my hands shaking as I picked it up. It was plain white, no markings, no address, just a small, handwritten note inside. It said, "Welcome home." I didn't sleep after finding that envelope. I sat on the floor, staring at it, replaying everything in my head. That note, "Welcome home," kept circling back, like a threat disguised as an invitation. Home. Whose home? It sure as hell wasn't mine. I paced around my apartment, double-checking the locks on the door, the windows. Everything was secure, but that didn't make me feel any safer. I was losing track of reality. It felt like the walls were closing in, like the world was pressing down on me, suffocating me. How was it possible that my life was being replaced? That things I'd never done, people I'd never met, were creeping into my existence like they belonged there? I needed answers. I needed to know if I was losing my mind or if something bigger was happening. In a panic, I started searching through my phone again. I opened my contacts, hoping for something familiar to cling to, but what I found instead made my stomach drop. There were names in my phone I didn't recognize, names that hadn't been there before. Some were just initials, MT or JL, and others were full names I had no memory of ever adding. But here's the worst part. My mom's number was gone, completely erased. I frantically searched for it, but it was like she'd never existed. In her place was a new contact, Beth, with a heart emoji next to the name. Beth, the woman from my dreams, the woman from the photo. My head started spinning. I tried to call my mom through Messenger, but it didn't connect. Her account was still there, but she wasn't answering. It was like she'd been replaced. I scrolled through my call history, praying I'd see familiar numbers, but everything was wrong. The last few calls were from numbers I didn't know, including one from Beth. The call logs showed we'd talked for over an hour 2 days ago, but I hadn't. I was sure of it. My memory was still mine, wasn't it? I couldn't have just forgotten something like that. Desperate, I pulled up the photo of her from the email again, staring at her face. She seemed so familiar, but I knew I'd never met her. I couldn't have. And yet, there she was, this stranger who somehow had slipped into my life like she'd been there all along. I knew I couldn't stay in my apartment any longer. The walls felt too close, like they were trapping me, suffocating me. I needed to get out, to clear my head, to figure out if this was some massive delusion or something worse. I grabbed my jacket and headed out into the street. The air outside was thick, humid, like a storm was about to break. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to move. The streets were eerily quiet, way quieter than usual. The kind of quiet that gets under your skin. I didn't see anyone out walking, no cars passing by, just me and the sound of my footsteps echoing in the distance. I pulled out my phone and dialed one of my friends, Steve, hoping he'd pick up and ground me, remind me that something still made sense in this nightmare. But when I hit call, something unexpected happened. The phone started ringing, but the name on the screen wasn't Steve's. It was Beth. My heart dropped. How the hell did that happen? I was staring at the number. I dialed Steve, but it was like my phone had decided who I was calling. Before I could hang up, the call connected. I heard her voice on the other end. "Nick, is that you?" Her voice was soft, almost concerned, like we'd known each other for years. My hands shook, and I almost dropped the phone. "What the hell is going on?" I blurted out, my voice cracking. "Who are you?" There was a pause, and then, in the calmest, most chilling voice, she said, "Don't you remember, honey? You're coming home soon." I slammed my thumb on the screen, ending the call, and stared at the phone in disbelief. My pulse was racing, my chest tight. I couldn't breathe. I needed to get off the street. I needed to get away. I ducked into an alley, leaning against the cold brick wall, trying to catch my breath. But before I could even think straight, my phone buzzed again. A text this time. It was from Beth. "We're waiting for you. Don't make us come get you." My heart pounded in my chest as I clutched my phone, staring at the screen. This couldn't be happening. There had to be an explanation. I couldn't let this other life take over. I couldn't. I looked around, desperate for any sign of normalcy. I spotted a coffee shop down the street, one I'd been to 1,000 times. It felt like my only shot at finding something real. I sprinted toward it, bursting through the door, breathing hard. Inside, everything seemed fine, normal. The familiar smell of coffee, people chatting at tables, the hum of conversation. For a second, I thought I was safe. I thought maybe I'd broken free of whatever the hell was happening. But then, as I walked up to the counter, the barista smiled at me. She was new, someone I'd never seen before, but her face lit up when she saw me, like we knew each other. "Hey, Derek," she said, with that same eerie warmth. The usual. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I just stared at her, my hands gripping the counter to steady myself. "No, my name's not Derek." She looked confused, her smile faltering for a second, like she was processing what I said. Then, as if something clicked in her mind, her smile returned, wider this time. Too wide. "Oh, right," she said softly. "Not yet." I stumbled back, nearly knocking over a chair. My pulse was racing, and I could feel my vision blurring around the edges. I needed to get out of there. I ran out of the shop, back into the street. My head was spinning. It felt like the world around me was closing in, collapsing. Every face I passed felt wrong, like I was seeing them through a filter, like they were versions of people I used to know, but not quite right. I turned down a side street, away from the crowds, and that's when I saw it. The house. The same house from my dreams. The same house from the photo. It was just sitting there, at the end of the street, like it had always been there. But I'd never seen it before in my life. My feet moved on their own, pulling me toward it. I didn't want to go, but I couldn't stop myself. It was like something was drawing me in, something deep inside me that I didn't understand. When I reached the front door, my hand trembled as I reached for the handle. I knew what I'd find inside. I knew. But before I could open the door, it swung open on its own. And there she was, Beth, standing in the doorway, smiling at me like she'd been waiting all along. "Welcome home, Derek," she whispered. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't Nick anymore. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at her. Beth's face was calm, patient, like she had all the time in the world. She didn't seem surprised to see me. In fact, it felt like she'd been waiting, like she always knew I'd end up here. "Come in," she said, her voice soft but firm, as though I had no other choice. And the terrifying part was, she was right. I didn't. Something inside me knew this was inevitable. My feet moved before I could stop them, stepping across the threshold into the house, the one I'd only ever seen in my dreams, but now stood in front of me like it had always been part of my reality. The moment I crossed the doorway, it felt like stepping into another life. The air was thick with a scent I couldn't place, familiar but distant, like a memory that didn't belong to me. The living room was just as I'd seen in my dreams, the cozy furniture, the photos on the wall, the remote on the coffee table. But there was something else now, something I hadn't noticed before. There were more photos. They lined the hallway, the mantel above the fireplace, even on small shelves around the room. Photos of me, or rather, photos of Derek. In each one, I was smiling, laughing, with Beth by my side, with friends and family I didn't recognize. There were pictures of us on vacations, at parties, even holidays. But there were no gaps, no signs of the life I remembered as Nick. It was like my old life never existed at all. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. This was impossible. It couldn't be real. But the more I tried to resist it, the more the weight of this new life pressed down on me. The memories in the photos felt real, like they belonged to me. And that's when I started to feel it. The shift. The part of me that was still holding on to Nick felt like it was slipping. I couldn't remember what I'd done 2 days ago, what I'd eaten for dinner last week, the faces of my friends, my old life. They were blurring, but I could remember Derek's life, how Beth laughed when she was embarrassed, how she always made pancakes on Sundays, how we'd met at a friend's party years ago. I knew these things, but they weren't my memories. They were his. But they were becoming mine, Beth watched me, her smile never fading. "You're home now," she said softly. "It's time to let go." "I'm not Derek," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I'm not." But even as I said it, I could feel the words slipping out of my grasp. Who was Nick? The name felt distant, like it belonged to someone else, someone I barely remembered. I looked down at my hands, trembling, and for a second, they didn't even feel like my own. Beth reached out and gently took my hand, pulling me toward the couch. "You don't have to fight it anymore," she said, her voice soothing. "This is who you were always meant to be." I wanted to pull away, to run, but my body wouldn't listen. I let her guide me to the couch, where I sat down, staring at the remote on the table. That same remote from the dreams. I picked it up, feeling the cold plastic under my fingers, and a flood of memories, Derek's memories, washed over me. This was my house. This was my life. This was my reality. But deep down, something was screaming inside me. The last shred of who I was, of Nick, was fighting to hold on. I couldn't just let go. I couldn't just disappear. I looked up at Beth, my heart racing. "What did you do to me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She tilted her head, her smile fading just a little. "We didn't do anything, Derek. You chose this. You came to us. You wanted a new life, and now it's yours." I shook my head, trying to clear the fog that was settling over my mind. "I didn't want this," I muttered. "I didn't ask for this." Beth's expression softened, almost like she pitied me. "You did, though. You bought it. You bought his life, and now it's time to live it." I stood up, backing away from her. "No, I didn't know. I didn't know this would happen." But even as I said the words, they felt hollow. Did I know? Had I really thought there wouldn't be consequences? I'd wanted to escape, to find something new, and now I had, but it wasn't what I expected. It was so much worse. Beth stood up, her eyes never leaving mine. "You can't go back," she said softly. "There's no Nick anymore, just Derek." I turned and ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to get out of that house, out of that life. I tore open the front door and stumbled into the street, gasping for air, my mind racing. But as I looked around, the neighborhood seemed different. The streets were unfamiliar, the houses strange, like I was seeing them for the first time. I looked down at my hands again, and they weren't shaking anymore. They were steady, like they belonged to someone else. The scar on my wrist, it was gone. The last piece of Nick had vanished. I stumbled toward a park nearby, trying to get my bearings. Everything around me felt distant, like I was seeing the world through a fog. I sat down on a bench, burying my face in my hands, trying to hold on to whatever I had left. But then, something shifted. The fog lifted, just a little, and I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I looked up, and for the first time, the world felt right. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was already unlocked, a photo of Beth on the lock screen, smiling at me. My hand didn't tremble this time as I scrolled through the contacts. There was no Nick, only Derek. And suddenly, I remembered. Pancakes on Sundays, vacations by the beach, late nights on the couch. I remembered my life, the one I had now, the one I'd chosen. Beth was waiting for me back home. I stood up, feeling the weight of my old life fade away, replaced by something new, something better. I started walking, the streetlights flickering overhead as the sun dipped below the horizon. The world felt clearer now, more familiar. And as I walked, I realized I didn't miss Nick anymore. I didn't miss the old life. This was where I was meant to be. As I made my way back to the house, I could hear Beth's voice in my head, soft and reassuring. Welcome home.